Welcome to the table, everyone. We're going to take a look at D-Day and beyond. So this is after setup. It goes a little bit beyond an unboxing, but I don't want to take too much of your time. But I did want to show you around the game, and it's epic. It's really good. Now the thing is, this is a lot of game for Tiny Battle Publishing, and I know some comments people have kind of made jokes about like that. You know, oh, Tiny Battle Publishing, and it's a large game. It is. This takes up almost the entirety of my play area, but it looks gorgeous. So I'm going to zoom in. This is kind of pulled out, but let's just kind of zoom in, take a look at a few places here. I hope the power cable don't mess things up as I move around. But the initial setup, I've got a bunch of the units out here. We've got quite a bit of coastline that's covered. You have way out here, you've got Germany, the Netherlands. In fact, my lighting doesn't even cover all of it. I take that power cable out, it's kind of dragging. So yeah, the lighting on this is going to be poor in a few spots, only because it's a huge map. So if you were looking for something like this is going to be right up your alley. Now, there were a couple of questions I've seen. I couldn't answer it because some folks have asked, like, how does this compare to somebody else's large-scale invasion game? I really don't know. This is my first large-scale invasion game. I usually play tactical games where I'm in charge of squads and platoons, but I was so excited to try this out because, one, I think it looks great. Like, if I just zoom down in here, I think the counter artwork is good. The map itself has really good artwork. And for this game, everything that you need to play, this is a bunch of admin markers I've got out. I don't have a lot of place to put stuff, so I've got the admin markers here. But the game weather track, carpet bombing, basically all the charts that you would need to really run the game are here on the map. And I'm okay with that. I know some people probably don't like that, but for this game it's actually really nice because it does help with the footprint. I don't have to have a separate side table with everything. I am able to get my reinforcement charts. They're over here too, kind of off to the side. So we've got, here's the Germans, reinforcements there, and as I come over, here's the initial units I can invade with, and then reinforcements over time. All this is currently located in England, and that's why there's no starting with American troops on the map. So right now this is the layout of the German defenses. Now basically we have the Allied turn track over here. Find it on the camera. The German one is off to the side. So when you're playing with your friend, really depending on how you sit, yeah, you know, it's just, I would have liked maybe if they could have fit the German turn sequence over here, because it's kind of weird. The German turn sequence is way over here on the far side of the map. I mean, you know, it's not that big a deal, but it just seems kind of oddly placed. But I guess depending on, like I said, depending on how you're sitting at the table, it's probably fine for you and your opponent. But basically, yeah, it's not a complicated game, okay? So let's go through my learning process. And this is a learning process, okay? First of all, the turn sequence is pretty simple. So you have a supply phase. I don't need to check supply phase on the very first turn because I don't have anything on the map yet. German player is same. They don't need to check for supply. And there is some differences in the supply, but the German player can trace uninterrupted lines of supply back to Germany and Switzerland and their controlled areas of the map, so they're fine. Then you check the weather phase. Now on the very first turn, the weather phase is fine, and you can do all your airstrikes. Everything is perfect. Tide. You have your naval support. Great. After that, though, you can start checking, and you're going to roll 2 dice 6, and basically you're going to check this number here, like the tide or your partial air or no air support. So for example, if I'm during turn 2, I could roll, and if I rolled a 5. So if I got 2 through 4, the tide would be such that I could not do an invasion, or I'm going to get half the effect of naval fire support. And then I could check for like how air might be affected by weather. So I rolled a 2. Great. The air is only affected on a 3 through 6, so if I rolled a 2, air isn't affected. Then I could check to see if there's no air at all, which is fine. And also we'll have notes, Axis Reserve Release on a 10 plus, and there's other little notes. One good thing I will point out, there's 2 versions of the game, basically 2 scenarios. So there's the full game, which is 50 turns, and then there's the short game, which is 12 turns. So again, just depending on your table space and how long you can keep a game up. I generally can't keep a game up long. I got cats, and it's a real pain trying to keep them off the table. I have to put little booby traps and things to discourage them from jumping up. So it might be a while before I can play a full 50 turn game. And the game does say it takes between 5 and 20 hours to play. So there's a lot going on here. So to play the full game, you might need to have some space that you can fully dedicate to that. And generally, if you're going to pick up a game like this, you probably have that set aside already. Okay, so looking at our turn sequence, there's the invasion phase. Now this is the fun part. The fun part is you have on the map, pull this up a little bit, there are 8 sectors. So starting way up here in the north is sector 1, and you're going to come down and you're going to pick a sector that you want to invade from. So there's pros and cons to this. And this is where you already get to start making some decisions. So first, as the allied player, I'm going to pick one of these sectors to invade from. You have a sector invasion chart, and it's going to tell you, depending on when you do your invasion, how many types of units you can bring in based on the sector you want to invade. So for example, if I want to invade in sector 2, on the first turn it says I can get 1 armor unit, 6 infantry, and 3 parachute units. Then you're going to place those units here in the dark blue hexes, and then eventually they're going to have to fight and try to establish some kind of beachhead. This is bad areas. There's a lot of stuff here, right? But there are, if you're the allied commander, you can invade from, say, for example, sector 6. Sector 8 is down here off of the camera. It's lightly defended, but down here, whoo, sector 7, there's like nothing there, right? So we could maybe invade and pop in along here somewhere. Now, the difference is there's submarine pins. So if you want to invade in sector 6, so like for example, it says here, sector 6, I can bring 1 armor, 5 infantry, 2 parachute units. And I can pick anything off my list, so I'm just going to pick, I'm looking at my initial at start location Britain. So here's an armor unit. I'm going to place it here. And then it says I can get 6 infantry. So I'm going to grab just some infantry. Nothing in particular. And you get to put 2 units per hex. And there's also some rules on, that's your divisions, but if you have like 2 brigades, you could use 2 brigades in place of a division. Or if you don't want to bring armor, you can replace armor with infantry, so you could bring a lot of infantry. So you're going to place them on this dark blue. That's where we're invading from. Even though I'm adjacent, I don't want to worry about zone of control. Well, there's going to be some zone of control. But essentially, I can attack from the sea, but we'll probably just end up moving because I want to establish some beachheads so I can do reinforcements and whatnot. But you decide where to do the invasion from. I'm going to check for submarines, dive for jump. I don't have all the numbers memorized, so I have to look at my book. But the book, it talks about the sub pins, and if you're in the sub pin area, you got to roll. Where is it at? Looking for the submarine section. Where is it at? Alright, had to find it real quick. But it says that for every sub pen that you control, that the German player controls, you're going to roll dice. The game comes with 2. I'm probably going to add a few more dice. I just was re-rolling these over. But let's say, for example, if I had like 5 sub pens, I'd roll, there's 2, 4, 5. And every 6 that you roll, you do a step loss. So right out the gate, I've already suffered some casualties. So yes, if you go up north with your invasion, because that's the English Channel that's been prepped for the invasion, there's no submarines, you can get stuff to the Atlantic Wall, but then you have to fight the German forces and force your way onto shore, right? Makes sense. But if you come down south a little bit and find these open areas, yeah, you have to stop at the Atlantic Wall and then push through, but you have to deal with submarines. Now, the step losses, that's something. Most of the Allied units, and these are stacked 2 different units, they've got a front side, and each unit has 3 values. I think I mentioned already their attack value, defense value, and movement. And when you take a loss, it's just a flip, and then eventually, you know, things will get wiped out. Generally, though, if things are wounded, there's options like you can send them back to England and reconstitute them rather than just let them get wiped out. The German player is a little bit different. They have some units that can't move. So like this one here, it's an infantry unit, but this white box means it doesn't move. So they're going to be kind of stuck in place. So once they go through their step losses, they're kind of gone. But there are some other German units that are much stronger, and they have 2 counters. So they'll have, you know, their unwounded side, their first step loss, then they'll have another step loss, and then finally dead. There's some armor units that are a little bit tougher. I'll show you one down here. So that's the 2nd SS Panzer unit right there. So they'll have their primary, they'll flip for a step loss, there's a step loss, and then finally that'll be their last point. So some of the German units are tougher. So it's really hard to say who's better off. Like the Germans, in essence, they appear to have fewer units, but some of the units are really tough. And the Allies have a lot of units, but they're usually 2 steps only. So there's a little bit of balance, I think, to the amount of units. But there's a lot of German units that are inflexible. So they have a lot of these units that are kind of stuck and immobile. And then they got some units that are quite flexible. They can move. They got movement points. It has movement points. Wait a minute. Can't move, movement point. Well, you know what? I just had a brain moment. Let me double check that one. Alright, the rule book says that means static. So in my mind, I took that to mean can't move. And I thought I read something on that. But it's one of those things where I read it, but now I can't find it now that I want to see it again. So the way I play is with static. So I have some units that are kind of stuck in place. They fight to the last man kind of a thing. And then the other ones that are just regularly marked infantry or armor, they're free for me to move around as to reinforce areas. Okay, so again, I want to just talk about some of the big points of the game. If you are starting, and that's kind of how I started, was focusing on movement and combat. So with movement, essentially when it's time to move things, because there's the movement phase, basically it's just like any game. You're going to pay the terrain effects of that particular hex you want to move into, and then you move on. Now, as far as part of the invasion, once you have successfully defeated like a German defender, if there was one, you then get to put a beachhead marker. There's a few of these. And this will be very important because now you have a spot on the map where you can now bring reinforcements. You want to also try to capture ports because ports, that's where the most complicated part is capturing, like these are fortresses with the red X, or the red dash marks, but there are the port areas that you can capture, And the thing is, with ports and with beachheads, and at some point where you can reinforce it and put what's called a mulberry, this is the most important part for the allied player, because their supply will run through the ports, it runs through the beachheads and the mulberries. I think mulberry you can even just put one out here, but you can reinforce a spot to improve how much it supplies. So these places, like here's a port, Cherbourg, move it up a little bit. It has, I just bumped that camera good. It's got a 10, which is how many units it can supply. So if you want to capture the port, because then this improves how many units it can supply. Beachheads had a limited number, but if you added a mulberry, it added like 6 to that. So if you had engineers reinforce a beachhead, basically that's how the allies are going to run their supply lines, because they will it's out like to 4 hexes, if I remember right. They can supply out to 4, and they can support a certain amount of units. Then, as you are bringing on reinforcements, you can eventually bring some more of the supply points, and then that will extend how far out. And that's the part I've been working on learning, is really how to run the supply. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I can supply like units out to like 4 away. So they have to, the allies, when they go to check for supply, they have to be able to check this, their lines back to the supply depots as they put them, and then that has to be an unbroken chain back to the ports or the beachheads. And as soon as a German player was to take that beachhead, if it's not defended, then all that support goes away. So this is the interesting part of the supply game, and I'm just simplifying it for you. So with the Germans, they don't have that. As long as they can run supply lines back to the border, they're good, because they had dense, like from reading the books, they had like dense railway and support networks all set up, so they're supplied pretty good. Like, it's really hard to get them out of supply. You got to really surround a unit with your zone of control. But the Allies, they're fragile. Well, at least to me, it appears fragile, because you have to really balance your push into Germany versus setting up supply points and leaving behind units to protect and guard those supply points. So there's like a game within a game for the Allied player. Now with the German player, there's a part on reinforcements, which I thought was kind of cool too. After an invasion occurs, so well, let's just talk about the invasion again real quick. So you can only do an invasion once every 8 turns, but you can go more turns between. So the earliest you can launch a second invasion is 8 turns. So for example, on the very first turn of the game, you have to launch an invasion, and you've got to fight your way onto the beach, which is why I liked coming to the south, because I just had to check on subs. Now that I've got people established on ground, we can make beachheads, protect those. To me, that just was like the easiest way to start. And then I make the Germans come to me. And then, once I start to get some places out, I can, move out and capture other stuff. But anyway, I wanted to secure here. But I would then have to wait if I wanted to attack another sector, for example, or re-invade a spot if they capture my beachheads. But you have to wait a minimum of 8 turns. So you could start on turn 1, then you have to wait till turn 9. In between, then it's bringing in reinforcements and replacements. Now the Germans, for their reinforcements after an invasion, they get to roll and check on there it is, release of German reserves is something they get to check for. And I like this because it adds some flavor to the game. I think the game has a lot of nice flavor baked into the rules in the rule book. And what it's saying here is that Hitler, depending on the severity of the invasion, doesn't necessarily want to release assets from Germany, so from the East Front, to come to the West Front. So depending on the turn after the invasion that you check and roll to see if stuff is released, there's a chance that nothing will be released. And then it says right here, You get to add to that roll to make the release the reserves happen, depending on what sector. So basically, if I'm invading from sector 7, it says the Allies invade sector 6 or 7, I add, or it says -1 to my roll. So if it's one turn after the invasion, like Hitler probably is not going to release the reserves, because I guess he doesn't think the southern part of France is that important. But if I attack up here, there's a pretty good chance the reinforcements or the reserves for Germans will be released. But I thought that was kind of a cool thing. So there's a chance for stuff coming in for the Germans, maybe, but the reason it might be held up is because it's on the East Front. There's also a lot of other stuff you can do, especially on the invasion, is every turn, this every turn I thought was kind of cool, there's naval support. So when you're fighting along the Atlantic Wall, like out here again there's nobody, but like if I was on the Atlantic Wall and I had to fight my way in, I could drop down some naval fire support, which would give +2 to my attack. You can stack it, but like you can't add the values together. So I can't put all 4 of my naval support on one area and get a +8. It'd be like 4 attack rolls with +2 each roll. So you can kind of spread that out to support your attack or in defense. So if you're getting attacked, you can drop some naval support for defense. You can also call in tactical airstrikes, which is pretty good. You get several of those every turn as well. And the tactical air support is colored to remind you who it supports. So you have this tan color, which would be like Polish and the British type forces, and then other allies, and then you have the one here that will support French and Americans. And basically it's more of like interdiction. There's like 5 missions they can do, so they can intercept, try to interrupt supply. There's also French resistance that you can drop in at some point. You get 2 of these. Now the tactical air support and naval strikes come every turn, but they have a range limit. So your naval support is only along the Atlantic Wall, and then the tactical air support is within the limits of the Allied air support line. So once you get a certain point into Germany, so for example, I'm invading, I like to invade kind of this southern area, but there's no Allied air support because the Allied line kind of stops right there. So I might be bringing troops in here, but now I've outpaced the Allied air support. But you also get French resistance that you can drop down, and generally it's going to be in France somewhere. So if I pop up there, and they aren't a fighting unit or anything like that, but this is like events that could happen. So you could do, they have a couple of interdiction missions that they can run, and then once you capture both, I think Paris they said was like 2 spots here. So if you capture both of the Paris city hexes, you then get 2 more French resistance. But once they're used up, they're used up. And so if they're down, basically they kind of exert a zone of control. So they interrupt the flow of supplies and things like that for German units. But if the German player was to move an infantry unit on there, they remove that token and it's gone. So it's a useful resource, but it's rather limited. But it's kind of cool that it has that. You can also do carpet bombing, so you can drop bombs on a target. And there's a carpet bombing. There's only four carpet bombing missions that you can do, and the carpet bombing is going to potentially cause loss of step losses for a German player. So you might want to drop it on a big stack of German units there. But there's only 4 carpet bombing missions for the game, and then you can only launch 1 per turn. And there's some other restrictions trying to remember. You can't launch it on the turn that you did an invasion or a paratroop drop. So it's just basically a run-of-the-mill turn. Hey, let's go ahead and drop one of my carpet bombing missions. But when you're doing a 50-turn mission, hard to say when you want to use those. So you got movement, you got your invasion, you got your movement, and then combat is basically an odds-based. So again, that was the other thing I was focusing on, was just learning like combat. Combat gives you some flexibility because you can combine your units into an attack. So for example, from the beachhead, I don't know if I want to attack that fortress, but we would. I would add up my attack values, so 4 and 4, and then I might want to drop one of those. Well, let's see here. I'd have to do it from, let's say we haven't established that beachhead. So I'm going to be here on landing crafts. We're at the beach. Drop a naval fire support. And then the fortress is a 3 shift to the left on a combat result. So basically, I was never good at math. So this is going to be 8 for the attacker, plus 2 for my naval fire support, so that's like 10, and that's 2 defense. So I'm looking at 5-to-1 odds, which is really good. And you can go above that too. So they have rules for going above that. Basically, you find the total difference, like if it's 7-to-1 odds. There is no 7-to-1 odd on the combat chart. I'll see if the camera will reach it, but basically anything that ends up above the 5-to-1 just gets dropped down to 5-to-1. So right now I'm 5-to-1 odds with the naval support there, but it does say, because there's the chart, that if you look here, fortress is 3 shifts to the left. So I'm going to go 5-to-1, 1, 2, 3. So I'm looking at 2-to-1. You roll your dice. I get a 4, so I cross-reference 4 onto the 2-to-1. Attacker takes 2 step losses. Defender takes 1 step loss. Well, that sucks. But if I come back, whoop, whiplash, down to where we're fighting, right there. So what did it say I take? I took 2, so I would say they would drop. They're going to drop to their weaker side. The defender takes 1, KIA. We have captured La Rochelle, and I don't have to put the beachhead necessarily because I know that's a captured port, but I captured a port. And that's basics of combat. So really, the game is not overly complicated. What you're going to start seeing in the complications are the little things that I pointed out to you, like remembering that the Allied supply is done differently. You have to manage the supply depots, you have to understand the limitations, and then you have to bring them in. So if you want to push deep, you got to have a nice supply line set up. You have to create your supply line. And then as we're looking, I'm trying not to knock over all my pieces here, but there's rel movement rules. Yeah, there's stacking limitations, only 4 units in a stack. There's marched movement. You have to worry about zones of control. Zones of control will affect things like how far you can move, but it's stopped by rivers and things like that. You got your invasion rules, tracking your step losses. There's multiple unit combat. So that was a basic combat, adding my attack. What I could have done was had each of those divisions attacked separately, or if there was like several German defenders, I could have attacked only 1 German defender. But when you do the invasion from an Atlantic wall and there's multiple German defenders in a hex, you attack that as 1 solid unit. So if there was like 2 of those units, they would have had a defense of 4 versus a defense of 2, for example. So for me, it's just a matter of trying to remember where all the little pieces go in. The nice thing is, nothing that I have seen are concepts I've not seen before. You know, I hope that makes sense, right? I have seen games that have all of these rules. It's just, what I'm saying is if you have any experience playing operational level games, there is nothing in here you have not dealt with before. You just have to learn it for this game. And probably I think the coolest thing, and I'm not going to read all of it here, but the designer notes. And this is what I thought was really cool. So it says Jim. There's 2 designers, Jim and John. So it says Jim and I enjoyed playing the groundbreaking for its time Avalon Hill game D-Day. However, it was first designed and published in the early 60s with some updates later. Newer historical research, game design techniques, and publishing abilities offered us a way to update this classic campaign into a new game. So I've had some people ask me, like, how does this compare to, say, you know, so-and-so's game or that game as far as invasions. Well, if you have any familiarity with the Avalon Hill game D-Day, what they did, and the notes talk about specific things that they changed and updated for the game that I think makes this really good. And again, if you're new to this like I am, and just kind of start with some of the basic concepts like, okay, my invasion starts here at the Atlantic Wall. I can either push in and I land for free, after I check for subs, or combat. Combat's real easy. Add up your attacking factors and just play like that, and then eventually you can start to add in those more complicated concepts of running the allied supply lines and little nuances like that. I think it's a great game. It is really fun. I have to say that my biggest thing that I have to deal with, and this is a me thing, are the cats in the house. So not only do I have to worry about the panthers on the game board, but like any game I play, I gotta worry about the panthers that live in the house, because they will pop up here, and there's been a couple times I've had to kind of rebuild my game from scratch because I had visitors, so I have to set things on the map to try and keep them off. But if you don't have any kind of problems like that, I think you're gonna like this game a lot. But like I said, I wanted to keep this fairly short, but I wanted to try and touch on some of the high-level concepts of the game to give you an idea of what to expect. But I'm trying to think, off the top of my head, I think right now the game is $55. So if a person was to ask me, is this worth $55? I'm going to say yeah, because I have seen similar games from other companies that run a lot higher, and you get about the same amount of stuff. This has, if I can, I can't remember, but you're talking two 36-inch. Well, it assembles into one. Combines into a 36-inch by 28-inch map of Europe. You get yourself 352 counters. You get 2 dice. You want to have some more dice because there's some things that you might want to roll, like the sub tax. But your rule book. But essentially, that's a lot. Okay, and it's not a complicated game, so you're going to easily get your $55 worth of play out of this, out of a couple game sessions. I honestly think this is worth your time. The counters, so far, I know one complaint people have sometimes about some games is like sticky edges and whatnot. These counters are great. All my counters, there's a couple of the admin counters that are like slightly misaligned. I mean, I'm talking slightly, but you can fully see what they are. But everything else, the counters are good. So for the gameplay is worth it. The counters, the maps, the supporting material you have, I think that this is a worthy addition to your game library if you are interested in a invasion of Europe type of game. Hopefully that gives you some pointers or some information that you need. If you have any questions, ask me and I'll see what I can answer for you. Otherwise, I hope to see you on the battlefield, and hopefully you can establish some beachheads up here. I'm kind of been afraid to try and land up there, kind of historically. So I've been more than happy to attack the southern areas that are less likely defended. So let me know what you're into. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you later.